Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Terri Cole Show. That I want to start with a question. Have you ever found yourself on the receiving end of questions like, why did you get divorced? Or how did your father die? Or what happened to the girlfriend that you brought last year here? These are all questions that people can and will readily ask you. But do you feel conflicted about how to respond when you are grieving the loss of something and someone is demanding information from you that you may not want to give them? If you're nodding your head yes, then this episode is for you. Because in this episode, I'm going to be talking about grieving and boundaries, how to establish appropriate boundaries when we're dealing with any kind of loss. How do we inform people of how to treat us? That is what I'm talking about in today's episode of the Terri Cole Show. So before we get started, if you are brand new to this channel, which you might be, I want to welcome you. And I also want to ask you and invite you to introduce yourself in the comments because we are a friendly bunch of people. I also want to make sure that you subscribe and hit the bell because I put out new material twice a week and I don't want you to miss a thing. If you don't know me, my name is Terri Cole. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, a relationship expert, and the author of Boundary Boss, which you can still get at boundarybossbook.com or anywhere fine books are sold. I love all of your questions and comments, and you guys know I read every single one, and every week I try to highlight a comment that I really liked. So from Robin Lynn, on the episode called Stop Overgiving for Balance and Less Resentment, Robin says, "Thanks, Terri, for this video and your work. I love the whole video, but really loved your statements towards the end. They are so empowering," in caps. Questioning, is this the way it is? And why does your life have to be this way? Great stuff, Terri. Thank you. Well, I'm so appreciative that you are here, and thank you for taking the time, Robin, for writing in, because it really warms my heart to know that what I'm putting out there is helping you, because that is my whole trip in life. So let's move on to today's episode. All right, losses come in all shapes and sizes. All right, I'm starting that again because my nose is running. Okay. And one more time. Losses come in all shapes and sizes. It isn't just like traditionally we think about grieving going along with the death of a human being, let's say. But it is not reserved for that. We need to grieve all of the many different kinds of losses that we experience throughout our lifetime. It could be death of a human. It could be death of a pet. It could be the end of a marriage, the end of a friendship, the end of a career. It could be the end of a particular life cycle. Maybe when kids are going off to college and you're empty nesting. Grief and grieving, the act of grieving, is such an important part of recognizing and basically honoring what we've experienced in life. Where if we don't honor the end of things, if we don't honor the way we feel about things changing or about saying goodbye to someone, whether it's a pet, whether it's a person, whether it's an office that you worked in, whether it's a way of life. You know, a lot of you have sent in questions to me about grieving and about why do you feel so sad about like losing your old routine. Because for 2 years, many people were not in the routine that many people really liked. Their work routine. Got out of the house, picked up their favorite coffee from their favorite place, went in, had their work friendships. And it's like a whole different family for many people, where suddenly all of the nuances of that experience are not happening, right? There's no longer that happening in many people's lives. And yes, there's a new normal, but here's the thing. If we don't grieve, then we don't have the capacity to really embrace what's great about what's now or the new normal. And the thing with grieving a person is that a lot of times there's a misconception from a therapeutic point of view that if we stay in the grief, right, if we don't move through the grief. Christina Rasmussen, a friend of mine who is an expert on grief, and wrote a whole entire book on it, and I'll link it in the show notes because she's so amazing. She talks about like being in the waiting area of life after the loss of someone important or after a devastating loss, where it's like we're not moving on, we're not moving forward with our life. But back to what I was saying, the misconception is that if we stay in grief, we won't really have lost the person. Like it's a way to keep that person close to us, which of course logically doesn't make sense. But it is such a common experience that I know that it's not just my many, many, many clients I've had over the last 25 years who've experienced this. But it really is something to sort of think about when we're talking about the death of a loved one. So much of the time, down deep in our heart, we know that they would want us to incorporate the life we had with them and move on, right? You're still here, right? I was telling you guys in another one of my videos, I think it was here, that a close friend of mine passed away about 6 months ago. And she came in a dream to another one of our friends. And in the dream, she was saying, "Oh my God, Allie, this is amazing. You get to live. Like you're still on earth. You still have time to be of more service, to help more people. Like you get to live." And that impacted me so deeply. And the people who transition to a different plane before us, or die, or whatever it is that you believe happens, if you believe that their souls go on, then believe that they would want us to continue to live a life that's worth living. They don't want us to also die when it's not our time to die, you know? Anyway, that's getting a little esoteric. Clearly, those are kind of my beliefs about it. Let's talk a little bit about, I have another example of what happens when we're grieving. A lot of times, especially if you're a people pleaser, if you're codependent, if you kind of are always taking care of other people's feelings and very dialed into the way other people feel, it's like it can be difficult to grieve, because when people are coming to you and asking you questions and, demanding how they can help, basically, you might then get worried about the way they feel. It might be an automatic response to sort of prioritize the way that they're feeling. And that will be very damaging to you, damaging to the friendship, but also damaging to your ability to effectively grieve. So I'm a really close friend of mine for like 30 years, Chris Carr. You guys might know her. Her brand is Crazy Sexy Life. Anyway, she's written tons of books. I mean, she's amazing. Her father passed away recently, and she was sharing on an Instagram Live that she gave herself permission to not respond to all the people who sent her, gifts and condolence cards and calls. And normally she would feel compelled to respond and to sort of acknowledge the people. And she was like, I just decided that I was going to prioritize my own grieving process and not put someone else's desire for me to acknowledge them above what I actually needed to do. So in the example of Chris Carr, self-care, taking care of yourself, is a really important aspect of grieving properly, which means we have to be really dialed into our people-pleasing tendencies if you lean towards that. So let's talk a little bit about being on either end of the spectrum. You might not know what to say to someone who is grieving, and people might not know what to say to you. So I think that it is a good rule of thumb from the Grief Recovery Institute to not say, right? Let's talk about what we don't say. We don't say, I know exactly how you feel, because you don't. We don't say, oh my God, my cousin twice removed died of that same cancer. It was awful. Nope. Like a lot of times we're looking for we want to make a connection with them. We want them to feel like we feel their pain. We understand what's going on. But it can be very minimizing when someone says, I know how you feel, because the reality is that they don't. So instead, and in the downloaded guide, just go to terricole.com/guide for this episode, I'm going to give you some scripts and some strategies and some ideas of how you can best support people who are grieving and how you can put up appropriate boundaries when you are grieving and when you don't feel like talking about something, and what can you say instead. So instead of saying, I know exactly how you feel, you can say, I can't imagine how you're feeling, but I'm here to listen if you want to talk, or I'm thinking about you. You can get in touch with your friend who maybe just had a miscarriage and just say, I'm thinking about you. There's no need for you to respond to me, right? Because that is all emotional labor. If we're reaching out to a friend and our need is that they get back to us because we want to know how they're doing, that's not about them. If you have a friend who is grieving, someone passed away, someone important to them, there are things you can actually do, especially if they're close friends, right? If they're close friends, you know what they eat. You know you can make food or buy food, have things delivered, get groceries for them, plan to have their kids watch them, bring them to your house, do laundry. Like actually, if these are close friends, because I know all those things about my friends, unless the person is super private and wouldn't want you to do that, but I feel like with my close friends, I know what they would need. And it's not necessarily them letting me know that they're okay, right? It's how can I add value? And again, it's a way of not centering someone else's grief on us, right? We can say, I'm sorry for your loss. I can't imagine how you're feeling, but I'm here if you want to talk, right? That is a loving thing to say. You can say, how can I best support you right now? Some people will know if they're grieving, some won't. So that's not always my go-to when there's been an important death, and even a death of a pet. For many people, this is as painful, if not more so, than the death of a person. And if you're not a pet person or you're not an animal person, you may not understand that, but here's the thing. You don't have to understand it or approve of it or think it's okay. If your friend is devastated and you love them, it's all about supporting your friend, right? Figuring out, is there a way that my presence can be comforting? You can say, I can just come sit. We can talk or not. And again, what's appropriate to say has everything to do with what your relationship is with the person, obviously. If it's an acquaintance, it's more like sending a card, potentially. But I think that when we are the ones in grief, so grieving, let's say a marriage, maybe you're getting a divorce, grieving, maybe you had a miscarriage and there's grief there, loss of job, loss of a career. There's many, many different things. If someone is asking you questions that you don't want to answer, like, why did you and Bob get divorced? Let's just say. Kasia Urbaniak has a really great, she calls it verbal self-defense, but she's got this great strategy, and I'll put her stuff in the show notes, how to get off the spot. So the way that she explains it, she was a dominatrix for actually 18 years. She's very smart, all about power dynamics. That's like what her expertise is. And she says that when someone is asking you a question, they are dominating you. When you flip the script, meaning instead of answering the question, you question the question. It's a really subtle and simple shift, but the most important part of this process is not giving up information, intimate information about yourself or about a loved one or about your situation that you don't want to. It could be about your health, and maybe you don't feel like talking about it. So you can say, why would you ask me that? Or, why would you want to know that? Or, how would that help you to know that? Usually, I don't get super aggressive with it, but I will say, why would you ask me that? Especially if it's something I'm definitely not going to answer. And usually the person goes, oh my God, I'm sorry. That was rude, right? I was just making conversation. And okay, I then let it go, and I don't feel bad that they feel bad, because it is intrusive and it's my right to not answer any question I don't feel like answering, especially when I'm in incredible pain. Some people will say, I was just curious. You're like, wow, you said that out loud. I had someone say that to me. I was like, you know what is not my problem? Your morbid curiosity about my family member's death. If you really want to know, you could probably find it online, but you're too lazy and have no idea of how you asking me that question is just ripping open this painful wound that is already painful. So be mindful. Don't let your curiosity get the best of you if someone is mourning. Yes, we're all curious, but asking the person who's in pain gory details about their loss is not supportive. And it's about you and not about them. So moving into what else can you say, right? If someone is asking, and it doesn't have to be about the death of a loved one, right? What happened to your job? You can say, oh, thanks for your interest, Aunt Betty, but I don't feel like talking about that. I'm not interested in talking about that. People, you can also use humor if it's a situation that's humorous enough, right? Meaning, if people are asking an intrusive question about how much money you make, you can say, oh, trust me, Aunt Betty, not nearly as much as I'm worth, or not nearly enough. Again, it's just not answering the question for you. Because what ends up happening, and think about this in your own life, have you ever had this scenario where someone asks you a question, you answer the question, and then the next day you're like, oh my God, I cannot believe I told my neighbor all that stuff simply because they were asking. So get it in your mind that someone else's morbid curiosity is not your problem. Someone else's nosiness is not your responsibility. Your job is to create boundaries that protect you, right? And ultimately they protect relationships too. But if something is going to harm you or make you feel bad, you do not need to answer that question. So, and the last thing I want to talk about, now I'm going to give you those scripts in the guide, terricole.com/guide. The last thing I want to talk about is what you've seen, right? You have a downloaded blueprint around change and flexibility. And again, I'm going to give you a couple of questions in the guide that you can answer to just see about how you relate to endings. Did other people in your life relate to endings a particular way? Was it swept under the carpet? Was it just never spoken of again? Was it ever processed when things ended, whether it was your parents' marriage? I mean, my parents' marriage ended. There was literally no conversation whatsoever. I was 13. I was like, oh, so he's moving out. Okay. I guess we're staying in the house. That's good. And because my family didn't have the capacity to talk about things like that, it wasn't even that abnormal. You would think that would be abnormal to not talk about it, but it was so normal to sweep things under the rug. And I didn't have any ability to talk about those things until I had many years of therapy. So this episode is a combination about you learning how to respond in a supportive way to others when they're grieving, how to lead others to treat you the way you want to be treated, how to treat yourself when you're grieving, and a little bit of a deeper dive into understanding why you relate to grief the way that you do. So I want to hear from you. If this resonated with you, if this added value to your life, you know where I hang out most. I'm on Instagram, but you can also drop comments under the blog itself. I hope you guys have an amazing week diving deep. And as always, take care of you.